Welcome to the Gather Gurus. We're going to talk about tons of different areas about events. Some of these topics are controversial, some are not. We're just going to make them controversial.
That's right.
So I'd love to start with wellness at events. I feel like this is a common topic and very popular right now. I'd love to talk about whether you think wellness is an addition or a distraction from events. I personally think it's an addition, but would love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, well, then I'll take the point that it can be a distraction, certainly if it's not properly sort of utilized, right? If we don't think about why we're having sort of wellness events beyond just the fact that, okay, everybody else is doing it, so let's wake up and have a morning yoga session. To me, there again, that's something that people can just do on their own, right? That's kind of a personal choice. If I want to do yoga, I want to go for a jog, I want to do resistance training, that sort of thing. Whereas if I'm forced into maybe something that I don't understand why we're doing it, then yeah, it can be a distraction.
Well, what about, people who feel like they have to be like at the event at all times and they can't fit in wellness? I feel like it's an easy way to just add in a little bit that makes people more focused and, want to be there more, I guess, because they get the opportunity to actually go out and interact in ways other than just networking or content or things like that. Except
for, you may be asking me to come out of my comfort zone is what I'd be concerned about, right? So if you're going to say, hey, we're going to have a morning yoga session. I've never done yoga. I don't really have a yoga outfit. I don't look good in Lululemons. No, I think I'll go to the gym and maybe lift a little bit, right? And so that's where I think if it's a short-sighted, if there's not sort of more strategy built around it or more understanding. Now, I think there's ways that it could be done properly, but we have to recognize that maybe it's not for everybody and it could become exclusionary at that point if we don't sort of be tactful and thoughtful in the way that we're producing these things.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there are ways you could build your agenda to be more around building opportunities for breaks or giving people more sleep time or even just getting like some of your sessions outside. Like that's kind of a way to get wellness that's not just adding a yoga session,
Right. And that's what I agree with. I think if we look at wellness as the actual sort of personal well-being of the individual and try to create an overall experience around that, not just the one session. But yeah, maybe we're going to offer those sessions, but yeah, we have some outside time for you. We also, there's other parts of wellness beyond just physical wellness. There's sort of your mental well-being, your financial well-being. Maybe there's opportunities for us to expose people to thoughts and ideas or groups of people that they can talk with on those topics as well, not just hey, I'm not really a gym guy, it's just not my thing. But hey, if you can tell me how I can better prepare for retirement, maybe that, and that in a form is wellness as well, right?
All right, you convinced me on that one. Wellness is a distraction unless it's implemented well.
Agreed, yeah.
I like that.
Or can be, certainly. Yeah.
Okay, networking at events, do attendees actually enjoy it?
Well, there again, that's a personality thing. I mean, I absolutely enjoy it. But I also recognize sort of the awkwardness. If I'm going to an event, I don't know anyone.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse, right? Yeah. You have a reception, and it's like, okay, I got my plate of shrimp and a cocktail, and now I'm standing here like a dummy.
Yeah.
And there's all these little cliques of people and groups of 3 and 4. It's like, how the heck do all these people know each other?
Oh, 100%.
And I'm the only one that doesn't know anybody.
Yeah. Worst nightmare.
And so, okay, now I got to kind of walk up and get my shoulder in and see if I can't, interrupt a conversation to somehow participate. And yeah, to me, that's a nightmare. So people don't enjoy that, right?
Yeah.
If we just sort of set them free and say, oh, we're having welcome networking reception, and that's the end of it, that can be horrible for a lot of people.
Yeah, I can't argue you on this one because that is exactly how I feel. I cannot tell you the amount of times I've stared at like the charcuterie board that they have out for way too long because I'm trying to avoid talking to anybody. Unless I know somebody, like that's just, oh my gosh. I was at a show last year and I literally walked the show floor, I think 7 times before I spoke to anybody because I was like, this is my nightmare.
And so if we can facilitate that experience for folks if we can bring in, opportunities, activations, things like that allow people even a momentary sort of interaction. Now we're no longer strangers. Now when I see you later that evening at the networking reception, we have some commonality. I can come and say, that was really cool. We saw in the expo hall, or that little activation thing, did you think more about that? And it's easier for me to sort of start up that conversation with you because we're not total strangers, even though we've only met for 30 seconds, maybe. At least we recognize one another.
So absolutely.
So I think that is super important.
Absolutely. I'm seeing a lot of trends right now of micro events or much smaller events, and people are saying they're moving away from very large events. Yay or nay on small events?
I think we need to be careful here. I think, yes, small boutique events are important, but at the same time, people's time is valuable, right? We want to make sure that we're creating an experience that is useful and unique. And if it's just a sort of small group, I'm going to run out of options pretty quick. So how small? It's tough, right? It's tough. So is there a way to have a small event a feel at a large event, right? How do we take bigger programs and sort of break them up into a schedule or an agenda that still gives us that boutique feel, but still offers me sort of that option? I think we've talked about this a lot too, right? People's attention spans are shorter. People's are very demanding with their time and with their focus. And so if we put them in an environment where they feel like, hey, I've sort of run out of options here fairly quickly, they may not see the value in that. So I think you can argue both ways for sure. So
yeah, I feel like when you're looking at the type of content that you want to do and like what is the end goal of your event, I mean, there's so much value in I think very small, maybe shortened events, but very small, very focused events that allow people to really have those deeper connections. Whereas, I mean, if you're looking to educate or inspire, I feel like those larger scale events are much more appropriate. And it's really, I mean, coming back to what are the goals of your event. But I love the idea of building in some more of those small event feel into these larger events. And, so you're not just tossing everybody into a big room to network. Right. You're actually giving them opportunity to connect with a smaller group that might be more relevant to them too.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think you really do need to look at what are the objectives, what are the outcomes. Yeah. Great example of that, like an incentive program, right? If we do a massive incentive program, we have an executive team there. They only have so much time to interact, and ultimately those people feel like, no, maybe I'm not that important, right? Yeah. So I'm kind of in this big mix, and I barely even got to say hello to my boss or my boss's boss kind of thing. Whereas if you can bring those a little bit smaller, a little bit more intimate, now people are going to actually feel like, wow, I got some personal time, right? I got some one-on-one time with our leadership team, and that's super important to me. Yeah, so. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, here's an interesting one. Are we too obsessed with the value of events? I think we can err on the side of being too obsessed with it, certainly, especially when it comes to purely the numbers, right? Yep. Events, we've always struggled with this, right? If we're trying to show ROI with events purely through numbers, purely through a spreadsheet, I think you're going to struggle, right? So one of the things we've been talking about is, yes, you need that data, you need those numbers, you need to track that. But at the same time, you also need to be able to tell the overall story, right? You need to be able to sort of track what has the feeling been, right? What is sort of the vibe? Yeah, we've been talking about a lot at this event, and what's the value in that? It's a lot like brand recognition in a way, right? It's not something that you can necessarily put a hard number on, but the fact that when people think back to the program that they were at, do they have a positive feeling about it, or do they have a negative feeling about it, or even neutral? And so, yeah, I think you need to be careful not to be so focused on the numbers that you're not then considering the overall environment and feel. Yeah, value is such a broad word that I feel like has been narrowed down to ROI, but I will counter that in that, there's a lot of pressure, I think, from leadership within companies to make sure that, the dollars being spent are being spent wisely. It's a typical marketing challenge, right? Of, justifying the various areas you're spending money. So for events professionals, being able to communicate the value, even if it isn't numerical,
is it direct ROI? Being able to communicate that well to your leadership, I think will help, ensure that you're still having those events in the future. And, I think the word value is used a lot, but it is still very important to make sure that, you're not just hosting events for the sake of hosting them. You're actually, creating something that drives, good experiences for the attendees, and then also drives good outcomes for your business.
Right. And I would agree. And I think, though, making sure that there's a lasting effect, right? There's a story that can be told about the program. It's important for meeting planners to know that they need to be able to sort of capture and tell that story after the program. So often we see this too, and we've talked about this a lot. 6 months after the event, or even 3 months after the event, when it's time to start even maybe budgeting or approving or planning for the next one, they've sort of forgotten, right? If that story hasn't been told, if they haven't been reminded of it, they've forgotten that feeling that they had at the event. In those sorts of situations, you need to sort of make sure, yes, you have all of that data, number one, but number two, that you've collected and curated sort of that story, that summary of the program, so that you can share that with leadership and go, no, this is why we do these things. This is the attitude that came out of it. This is the direct results, yes, that came out of it, but here's also the feeling that came out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. This one is also interesting. Are vendors actually necessary at an event, specifically at conferences?
Vendors as in like sponsors and exhibitors. I mean, I'll take the side of yes.
Okay.
If you'd like to go for no. I do see some negatives, certainly. But I would say absolutely, in that this is an opportunity for those connections to be made. Nothing happens, what's the saying? Nothing happens within a silo, right? So many businesses are dependent on those strategic partnerships, right? Those suppliers, those vendors. And if it's a nameless, sort of faceless relationship that we have, sure, we're going to maybe get, the letter of the agreement done, but nothing beyond that, right? We're not really going to align our partners and our vendors with our business objectives. We're not going to give them opportunities perhaps to see and notice things that we may not, externally. They have a completely different perspective on our business. And so it's so important for us to have those personal relationships with those suppliers, because they can provide so much value. They can notice things and see things and anticipate things. Having those vendors at the program is that opportunity to build and extend those relationships, as well as then obviously offset costs.
I'm going to take the opposite stance with a caveat that it has become kind of the standard to have exhibitors at events, but there's not really a lot of thought put behind it anymore. And I feel like a lot of exhibitors are seeing diminishing returns on being at events. They have to put in all the work versus, thinking through your sponsorship packages. What experience do you want the attendees to have? Do you want them avoiding the tables at the conference? I mean, that happens so often. We've been to so many events where people just, they put their phone in front of them, or they avoid eye contact with the vendors. And so, how can you build out a program that is going to be mutually beneficial for both parties? And I think we're seeing a lot of clients kind of move away from the traditional model of vendor tables and, trying out hospitality suites or small group outings, or things that are kind of led by the sponsors versus just having, a 6-foot table with a tablecloth and nobody's actually manning the booth because they want to go to the networking events. It needs to be rethought a bit more, and a little bit more strategy put behind it.
I would concede, I think, very much like what we've talked about even in the beginning with the networking, right? There's nothing worse than walking through sort of those rows of exhibitor halls with sort of trying to hand you junk that you don't even need, and really sort of no understanding of that. So it definitely needs to be sort of rethought and reformatted and be strategic.
There's nothing I hate more than being sold to. So if anybody tries to call me, I will not pick up the phone.
And we have heard that is a comment, right? Companies do need to realize that as well. You're still making this a significant investment to bring your people all together at the same place at the same time. Do we really just want to sit there and have them sold to for half of the time that they're
exactly?
What is the opportunity cost of that, right? Now we're distracting them. They feel like they're they've been sold out in a way, right? Why did I come to this just so you can put me in the pressure cooker with a bunch of salespeople?
Exactly.
So,
okay, what is the worst food you've had at an event?
I think for most people, what it is, especially us working internationally, I think it's the failure to recognize dietary preferences, where the negative experience comes in, right? For the most part, if you're working with decent properties, the food's going to be good, right? You should be safe. But where I think planners can fall short is on recognizing, like I said, dietary, which everybody's pretty good at, but even cultural differences, right? Or even just personal preferences. We spend a lot of time sort of thinking about who are our attendees. I mean, there are groups of people where, feed them steak and eggs, or steak and potatoes, every day.
Yeah.
And steak and sandwiches for lunch. It can be steak all day long, three meals a day, and they love it, right? And they're absolutely thrilled. More people would have negative feelings or negative experience through not having the foods that they enjoy.
Yeah.
Or prefer.
I can't argue with you there, because some organizations want to do, donuts and fun stuff, and then some will focus more on healthy food, and I'm very much of the healthy food vein. My snacks are going to be very different than I think some people prefer, so it's hard to, I think in a way you don't want to be putting your own preferences into an event that you may have attendees that have completely different preferences. So taking a look at, who is coming to this event, and maybe they don't care about the wellness thing, or maybe they do care, and making sure that whatever your own preferences are as an organizer or as a leader of the event doesn't get put upon the attendees. And I think that has been a interesting thing for me to observe at events, that my preferences are going to be different than someone else's.
Right.
So
Yeah, and so there needs to be a lot of variety there. And for meeting planners, if you're going in cold, you do your best, but a lot, like we talked about with telling that story.
Yeah.
If this is an event that happens year over year, if this is an internal team that comes together, making sure that you're sort of surveying and talking to people and getting to understand who and what they are, and year over year making those improvements, right, is important. I'll steal a story actually that I just heard from a colleague, which was about shellfish, which I know is near to you. Not only, obviously there's a lot of dietary restrictions around that, but we have to consider the type of food that we're giving with the size of the group. So there was this shellfish tower that happened at the event, and it's obviously very popular, but since it's so popular, it was a 1,200 person event, there's this massive line, right? There's not this really ability to distribute it, because you do need to keep it somewhat isolated in case there are allergies for other people. But now this thing that was meant to be exciting and a bonus for people actually became a negative comment in the survey, because I couldn't get to the shrimp tower because it was so popular. Yeah. Right. And it's like, you'd almost be better off just not having that, right? People won't. That's what we also need to recognize, right? Is people don't notice necessarily what's not there, right? And so there are often things that we'll try to go above and beyond on, pizza oven, for example, is a absolutely fantastic, super popular. Yeah. But there's only so much volume. You can't have one pizza oven for 500 people. Yeah. Because everybody wants a fresh pizza, everybody loves it, but the thing only spits out, 3 or 4 pizzas, in a 5-minute period, right? Yeah. You just can't feed that many people. Now you can have 10 pizza ovens maybe and cover it, but is that going to be really feasible, right? Yeah. So we need to be careful and aware of those, the ability to not only give the people what they want, but give them what they want in sort of a timely and polite manner.
Yeah, I'm taking notes for my wedding, because this is something that's coming up as we pick up venues. I don't want people standing in lines driving nuts. Right. If I have to stand in the line for more than 5 minutes, I'm leaving. Right. And I think that comes up so much at events. We see this particularly around mealtime, but the bars, even just standing in line to get into a breakout session sometimes, and thinking through ways to avoid that, and especially with food, because people are going to be hungry and they want to grab whatever the cool item is or the delicious item. I think that's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, that actually brings up another story too that I can tell about an event we just had, which is welcome reception. Lines at the bar were huge. the team was, sort of observing what was happening, and it was really everybody's just going to the bar to grab a beer. And it was like, hold on, we don't need bartenders necessarily, especially with this particular group of people, to serve everybody beer. The next day they converted to beer troughs. Everybody could grab, go grab your own beer, and suddenly there's no lines.
Yeah.
Right? And everybody was super happy. They just go grab a beer, and it's a casual thing, and people loved it. And it's a simple sort of shift of, okay, if this group just wants to grab a beer, let's just make it so they can grab a beer.
Make it super easy.
Right.
I love that. All right. Can you plan an impactful event for under $500,000?
I mean, one of my saying, I don't know if it's my saying, I must have heard it from somebody else, but creativity is not a function of budget. You heard me say it.
Yep.
So I'll take that approach. I think there can be challenges with low budgets for sure. So pretending like there's not is a joke, right? I mean, ultimately, especially depending on the type of event. Let's say it's an internal event. We talk to people a lot about this. We have to pay to get them there. We have to put a roof over their head, and we have to feed them, right? And so if there's just a certain number of people, those are sort of fixed costs. We don't have a lot of variability there. We don't have a lot of influence over what flights cost, right? We don't have a ton of influence. We do in food and beverage, but there is sort of a base standard, right? We can't go much lower. Of course, we don't have to have lobster and caviar the whole time, but at a minimum, there is sort of a minimum there. And same thing with a hotel. We're not going to work in a Motel 6. We've got to be in a conference center that has certain facilities and that sort of thing. And so those sort of primary, bucket items can chew up a lot of that budget and not leave you with a lot left over to sort of be creative with or be effective with. And that's, within reason, I think that's where people have to look at what are the creative ways, what are the internal resources that we can use, what is the scheduling items that we can adjust, what are the additional revenue opportunities that we might have around an event, what are the, maybe off the beaten path locations that we might be able to go to. And that's where I say creativity is not a function of budget. It's not that creativity in the sense of having the most amazing graphics or signage or that sort of thing. No, it's creativity in how do we schedule these things? Where do we locate the event? What time of the year do we do it? Being creative or thinking out of the box, to use that term, in just the overall structure of the program, right? In order to be effective with a tight budget.
Yeah. All right. I got to take the opposite stance. I'm going to say, obviously it depends on a lot of factors, but let's say you're doing a 3-day event for 500 people. You're going to start to struggle with, when you look at production and feeding people and, those kind of big bucket costs, you're going to start to struggle once you get to a certain threshold of people. And, you may have to look at skimping on certain things, but, production, I think, is a big one where we talk about this a lot, that the production value of your event is going to make a huge difference for just like you said, the vibe, but the overall impact of your event. If you have, struggles with, mics not working, or if your screens are not working, or, if it just looks lackluster, I think you're not going to have the kind of impact that you necessarily want for attendees. And you get to a point where you're like, well, why are we spending this money if we're not getting the outcomes that we want? So I think as, you look at the size and scope of your event, getting to a certain budget threshold that you need to be above. And I think we're seeing more and more that, these smaller budgets, they can be impactful, but for smaller events. And if you're at a certain size event, you're not going to have as much of an impact.
I would agree. I agree with you there, especially when you think of, and we've run into this situation before, if you're already making, let's say, $1 million investment or even a $500,000 investment in your program, and it takes another 10 or 20%, right, to really actually truly make it effective. You're right. I think companies should sort of recognize, look, either we shouldn't be doing this at all and just save the entire 500,000, or much like a poker game, you're pot committed, right? If I'm going in for 500,000 and it's going to take 6 to make it really good, well, you're right. That either don't spend the 500 at all, or go ahead and figure out how to get that extra 100 or 150 or whatever it takes to really make it effective.
Yeah.
And we have seen people sort of fall short with not understanding that. And that goes back to even that kind of storytelling, right? We talk to folks often, right? By the time you get them there, feed them, get them a hotel room, 85% of your budget's gone. To cut it off there is actually pretty short-sighted. Let's just go a little bit, let's take that a little bit extra further. That last 100, 200,000 actually can be the most effective, $100,000 or $200,000 part of your budget for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Yay or nay, people coming to your sponsor booth for free drinks?
I'll say nay. In general, we talked about wellness early on. Seems to be less focus on alcohol, let's say, just in general, right? Or less importance given. In fact, maybe it has nothing to do with events, but I saw something about the wine industry, for example, has declined, sort of post. And so I think it can be dangerous to really, make our events or our pitch sort of alcohol centric, right?
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways it's sort of the opposite of what we're putting out there if we're talking about wellness and well-being and success and that sort of thing. I think people kind of recognize that. But at the same time, people are adults, they're free to do what they want. I'm not saying cut it off. I'm just saying it's kind of similar to if it's not there, people, if something's not there, they won't necessarily notice. So I would emphasize or maybe lean a little bit, and there again, might just be where I am in my life and that sort of thing, but let's take a little bit of the emphasis off of the alcohol.
Yeah. I think it still works maybe to bring people in, but then it turns into, I'm just here for the drink. I don't actually care about your business. And so, it's almost like a cheat code to get people into your booth versus, are you actually getting the people that you want to engage with, that you want to like have those conversations with? So I think, from a interest level in terms of getting people to your booth, I think there's still value in that, but, I don't know if it's the most effective for getting your sponsors what they want. Right. And interesting to note about the wine. We'll have to look into that. All right. Celebrity keynotes, yay or nay?
I struggle with this, especially as of late, because I spend a lot of time on YouTube. Not a lot, but I spend my time that I do spend on YouTube is sort of looking for subject matter experts that I want to hear from. And there's so much great content out there on YouTube, right? And so I start to feel like, look, you're not going to do any better than I can do on my own as far as me finding, sort of the subject matter expert on whatever particular topic I'm interested in, right?
Yeah.
The best, the world's best lectures are all available at our fingertips, right?
Yeah.
And so really, what is your keynote going to teach me that I couldn't sort of find on my own, right? Why do I need to see that person live, right?
I will say I definitely have signed up for events because I want to go see a certain speaker. There's something about being in the room with somebody that you idolize or think, just this celebrity that you were like, have bragging rights that, I went and saw this person. So I think there can be definitely an enticing aspect to that if you're trying to get people to come to your event. But I think kind of what you were getting at too is that, you need to make sure that whoever you're getting to speak at your event is a good balance of like making sure you're not spending all your budget just to get somebody in the door so that you can get people to come to the event, because you may have people sign up that like don't care about the rest of your content just because they want to come see the speaker, or you may not have as engaged of an audience for the rest of your event just because of that celebrity, right? So, and you got to make sure that whoever you book also fits within the audience that you're bringing in and the content that you're looking to build throughout the rest of the event. So, I think I still like it. I mean, I think it's pretty cool to say, I went and saw such and such live, but definitely have to do it right. Don't just do it for the sake of booking somebody cool.
Right. And I would agree with you. I think as long as we have sort of thought about, by bringing in this keynote speaker, it actually reinforces sort of the message that we have, or even better yet, it, affects the person's experience there. Let's say we bring in a keynote speaker to speak about, corporate social responsibility or philanthropy in general. And then we give people the opportunity to participate in an activity, right? So we're actually connecting that talk, that message with the experience that they're having. And they're not just this sort of, consumer of that content, but they're actually a participator in it.
Yeah, I love that idea, making it more than just like the one conversation. It kind of goes throughout the entire event. This one might get a lot of people fighting us in the comments. Planning a conference is hard, yes or no? You don't have to believe what you're saying, you just got to take a stance.
I'm trying to phrase this in a different way. Or I mean, I'm not phrasing it in a different way, but I'm thinking about it. Hard in that, is it a lot of work? Yes, but for most people, if the work that they're doing is rewarding, it doesn't sort of feel like work, right? So you're willing to do hard things if the payoff is there. And so that's going to be my stance, right? If it's hard and painful to you, maybe you're not in it for the right reasons. Maybe you're not understanding what the overall objectives or outcomes could be, or maybe you're falling short of that. Maybe if you're just trying to get people there, check off the list, check the boxes. Okay, we did it. It was hard, but you didn't actually enjoy your time there. You didn't actually see, the experience that people were having and the fulfillment and enjoyment that they were having by being there. It shouldn't feel hard, I guess, is the point, or it should feel very rewarding. And if it doesn't, you either chose the wrong career or you need to rethink why you're having the program in the first place.
All right, I gotta take the opposite stance. I think a lot of people might think it's not hard, but there are so many moving pieces with a conference that, if you don't have the expertise, I think that it's going to be a lot harder than you expect it to be. To your point, if you enjoy it and you have the expertise for it, I think that it can be, it gets easier the more you do it, right? It's like working out. But if you come into it expecting it to be easy and you don't have that experience, you may find that it is extremely hard.
I agree with you, and I'll expand on my point then a little bit as well. It's never a one person show.
No.
You know what I mean? And you're right. We have seen that, right? Where people go, "Yeah, I can plan an event." And if you're just trying to do it solo and all by yourself, absolutely, it's going to be very hard, and ultimately, it's not going to be very good. I think where I was talking about, or what I left out of that part is really aligning a group. Even we've talked about this, even the name Go Gather. It's really about gathering the right team behind you in that planning process and bringing them along to understand, sort of that big picture, the overall objectives that we're looking to accomplish. And absolutely, you have to have a solid team the whole time, because it will be hard. It'll be damn near impossible as a one person. Even on a small conference, you're only as good as every single one of those suppliers that you engage with your hotel, your caterer, your production company, all of that. And you can try to force the issue with all those people and be super stressed out and make threats and have your hair on fire. But that only gets you so far. Right?
Yeah. I mean, you made a good point there. If you don't work well with the people that you're planning with, I feel like, you got to enjoy the people you're working with to be able to pull off a good event, because there's so much stress involved with it. So, how about audience generated content? Yay or nay?
Yay, in that I think pulling the audience and really sort of understanding their perspective prior to a program is very important. Understanding what are the things that they want to, they're struggling with. What do they want to see? What do they want to hear? What are the sort of case studies that are going to be meaningful to them? Yeah, absolutely. And so I would say yay on audience generated content under a structure. I think you need to give people a template. I think you need to give them ideas on how to do that. Just to go out and say, hey, just tell us what you think. It's difficult. It's hard for me to answer this question, right, without a little bit more structure around it. And so I think if we structure the requests that we're making of the audience and give them sort of the guidelines and the template or the framework for them to work in to provide that content back to us, I think it can be very valuable.
Yeah. From the nay side, I think there's been a lot of push for like user generated content, but I feel like you're going to have people who are for sure going to be behind it, and they're going to be posting a lot to their network, and they're going to be willing to, partake in creating that content. But I feel like the majority of attendees that you have are not going to participate. And so relying on that, I think, is a challenge. And, there's this feeling that, my event's going to be more successful because I have people posting about it on social media and things like that. And maybe to a degree, but I think you're really only going to have a few people who are really big supporters of the event or like to post to their networks, right? And so asking everybody to do that, especially in the gamification piece, I really dislike that, gain points to win prizes if you post on your social media. Well, maybe I'm not a poster, and that I can't believe I'm saying that as a marketer, but I think we have to really think through what the appropriate way to do user-generated content. And like you said, having people come on stage and share their stories and make it more so an audience, keep it within the ecosystem of your event versus like relying on them to advertise your event, I guess, is kind of my thought on user-generated content.
Yeah, I would agree. I think you're right there. And I think if that user-generated content, and maybe this is one of your questions, is, or that sort of pre-event or even just overall sort of social media exposure is a goal, maybe that's where we look more to influencers to help us with that sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
But then, people that already have a following, people that are sort of professional posters, right? But yeah, make sure that the things that we're asking of our audience are specific and relevant to them and not so much sort of the mass market.
Yeah, totally agree there. Love it. Vane, documenting every second of your event, yay or nay?
As far as like recording every session and having all that?
Yeah, and creating content for everything.
I'll go with the nay side because I feel like we've been doing this for years and years and years. And not that it can't be effective, but that just documenting it, just recording every session, just doing that, just fills you up with gigabytes of sort of unused and worthless data, right?
Yeah.
If we don't have a strategy, if we don't have the resources to actually utilize, to edit and hone those things down and put them in sort of meaningful packets, consumable sort of bits, right? Reels, for example. I love Reels. I'm on them all the time. I don't need to document every second of the event. If you can just give me a couple of fun, cool reel highlights, I'm good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I would say yay to documenting most of your event because I think even if we think we're recording a lot of stuff, I feel like we actually do miss out on a lot of content unless you are really building a strategy around having a content documenter or a videographer and social media documenters on site. I think there is more opportunity to build content from what's going on site. So I kind of like, again, that's the marketing brain on me, but I definitely think sometimes the emphasis gets taken off of the event itself and more on building content for the rest of your followers, which can backfire, right?
What about you? I mean, we've seen this obviously within even our ecosystem, the AI note taking, right? Is that ready? Is that event ready? Should we have AI, taking notes during all of our sessions? And
have you seen how good it is? I love it. I think that would be really cool actually to have some sort of capability to be able to summarize and take action items from discussions in particular, like, workshops and things like that. I think it would be really cool because then you have, can you imagine, building that and then giving everybody kind of a takeaway afterwards, or being able to do like an email drip campaign afterwards that summarizes some of the learnings. I feel like that would be really cool.
Right. Especially if you do like text over sort of imagery presentations and that sort of thing, right? You have the AI generate.
Totally.
Hey, we're going to take 12 hours of content and boil it down to, 5.
Yeah. And then you keep people engaged afterwards, right? And they can still continue to learn and have those conversations. And, you can bring some of those conversations over into your LinkedIn group.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got a big program coming up next month. I think AI note taking.
There we go.
Sessions.
I like it. I have
to test it out.
Yeah. All right. My last question, since we're kind of on the vein, you mentioned Instagram Reels, but I feel like there's been a lot of trends towards shorter sessions. That kind of TED Talk style or more of like a TikTok kind of quick hit feeling in sessions. Are you a supporter of that, or is that detracting from an event?
No, I'm going to go with the supporter side,
Okay.
although I can see how it's just detracting. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that. Yeah, we talk about people's attention spans a lot, right? And the fact that just sitting there and sort of just listening to a one-way conversation is difficult for people. I think there's the right environment for that, for sure, but I think we need to be strategic in how often we're putting people in that type of environment and really let people, it's my favorite term, break out from the breakout, right? So how do we get out of the traditional, get me in this box with 20 other people, 4 white walls around me and one screen in front of me, and now I'm sitting here. Maybe there's some conversation, that kind of thing. And so we've talked about how do we utilize, even at hotel venues, what are the other unique venues that we can perhaps utilize? It could even be lobby space or outdoor space if the weather's right, or, restaurant space that maybe isn't being used, and just kind of get people out of the typical meeting environment and get them in an environment where maybe they're a little bit more comfortable having a discussion. That does, though, obviously heavily rely on our presenters, on our speakers, right?
Yeah.
And so I do see, perhaps, not to give you too much ammo here, but where
I'm ready.
Yeah, where that could go downhill. But I think recognizing not only just within the session, but within the agenda overall, the fact that we all now walk around with this unlimited connectivity. And just our daily habits of being able to pick up that phone.
Yeah.
I hate to even admit, probably 100 times, 50 times an hour, or whatever the heck it is. We need to recognize that and at least just not ignore that behavior and make sure that we're, somehow accommodating toward it.
Yeah. All right. My thought on the short sessions. I mean, I fully agree with what you're saying. Get people out from behind the screens. I think, we spend all day in front of a screen, whether you're working on a computer, on your phone, watching TV, whatever it is. I mean, then sitting for hours on end in front of a screen is awful. I will say, though, from, a counterpoint to a lot of these like shorter, quick hit sessions is that's kind of what we get day to day. So I feel like a lot of people want to come to events for more of that deeper learning, that larger connection. And how do we facilitate that? I mean, I'm a big fan of, maybe having some shorter sessions, some longer sessions. And have you ever been to a session where you walk out and you're like, why did I even sit in this? Because I didn't learn anything. I could have learned this online. Right. So how do we facilitate more of those deeper learning opportunities? Because people are, going out of their ways to come attend your event. They're taking time off work. They're spending money. They want to get really valuable information from the event. So I feel like if we focus too much on these really short sessions, and particularly, like you said, work with your speakers, make sure your speakers understand that just because it's short doesn't mean it can't be impactful, and you got to make sure that you're building in good information, even if it's a 20-minute, 15-minute session.
Right. I'll agree with you too. I think, the popularity of this format, podcasting, right, kind of shows us that people are willing to sit and listen to longer format kind of conversations, but that's where it goes, right? It's really a conversation. So just kind of brainstorming here. We talk about a keynote speaker. Well, maybe a keynote speaker is a popular podcaster, and it's not just the speaker. It's actually, hey, come to this live podcast session. That may even have some audience participation. And then it can be much longer format. It can be a conversation that goes into much more depth, that people are actually interested in. Yeah. Because, maybe that is a personality or somebody that they're already accustomed to listening to. They already, want to hear more from. So,
All right, my last question for you. I lied on the last one, that was the last one, but what is your most controversial or hot take opinion about corporate events?
If they're not going to be effective, don't do them at all. If you don't have sort of a very clear and specific objective in mind for that event, what is it that we want people to walk away honestly feeling, right? What are we trying to motivate people to do from attending this event? I can't think of any other reason to have an event if there's not some sort of behavior that we're looking to motivate.
Yeah.
You know, to sell more, to build brand awareness, to whatever it happens to be. And so often people are having events just because they have an annual sales kickoff. That's what we have.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, just having an annual sales kickoff. There's got to be more to it than that. And so, don't do it at all if you're not clear on why.
I fully agree with that. I think my controversial take is kind of similar. I would say a lot of corporate events suck. And I think a lot of it has to do with not being willing to take risks that are going to make them better.
Right.
You know, being willing to kind of shake up the format of your event or, put the effort into surveying your attendees before the event. I think there's a lot of hesitancy there to really take that leap. And it ends up, I think a lot of events end up being lackluster.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree. I have one other hot take.
Yeah.
This goes more for the industry folks, right? Not so much the decision makers, but the people that are in the trenches actually planning events, which is an event planner is actually the host of the event, and their attitude, their outlook will affect the entire program.
Yeah.
And so these planners that sort of get into the industry because they like planning things, because they like checklists and that sort of thing, I think are obligated to go back to what I just talked about, which is, okay, maybe that's why I got into this, but now the position that I'm in it's really crucial that I understand the overall goals and objectives, and I am the advocate to get those things done.
Fully agree with that. Alrighty. Any other last thoughts from all this random opinions?
No, I think that's it. Fantastic.
Awesome. I love it. Well,
thanks everybody.
Thanks for your time, Brian. Definitely excited to hear everybody's takes on all of our hot takes and see if there's any other opinions that come out of this. So.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the comments.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody.